All right, I'll give my quick little introduction before passing it over to Luke. Welcome back, Sarah. Luckily, these are recorded, so hopefully people will watch it and we can have a discussion. And if anybody in any of the Journey Micro churches asks, well, what about Revelation or something, we can just be like, well, we were there, we talked about it. You could have joined us, but luckily you can watch this. As you can see, tonight is how Babylon is destroyed. Following this theme started from last week, which was how to live in Babylon, which I think we had a great discussion for the few of us that were there. It was interesting to hear people's point of view and how we had a little bit of a variety of how people viewed how the church and Christians should interact with the nations that they live in. So continuing on that, if last week we talked about what are Babylons and how we live in it, tonight we're looking about the future of Babylons and what is basically the end result for them. And if you don't know, there's actually several different ways to read the book of Revelation. If you're like me, you might have grown up just hearing that there was one way to read it and that was the right way, and you never were told that there were other ways that people actually understood this. So I'm very happy for Luke taking this, because being gone all weekend at the wedding and stuff, it was like, this would have been really hard to plan, but I'm glad to have other people, other voices here in the Diving Deeper. So I'm going to pass it over to Luke, and he's going to lead us tonight. So I give that to you.
Great. I'll go like this, Shelby. Is that okay?
Yeah, that should be fine. As long as it's kind of somewhere near your face.
Perfect. Great. So yeah, as Shelby's introduced, we're going to be looking at the book of Revelation this evening, and some of the different views that exist in how that's interpreted. Now, the book of Revelation is so called because it starts by saying that this is a revelation of Jesus Christ. And in this book, Jesus is revealing things that are to come, but also revealing more of himself through it. And although the book claims to reveal things, it has still managed to cause a lot of controversy about what exactly is being revealed. There's a lot of intense imagery in the book, and people take that in a lot of different ways, and that's some of what we're going to look at this evening. But even sort of with all that controversy, a lot of these images are very familiar to us. So, for example, there's a period of great tribulation in the book of Revelation where the four horsemen of the apocalypse come out, bringing conflict, war, famine, and death. We see a beast arise and lead a sort of demonic trinity that gathers the kings of the earth for a final cataclysmic battle at Armageddon. We have that imagery of the beast being a man, and that number 666. And as well as these perhaps more violent images that are familiar to us, even in our sort of popular culture, sort of Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Armageddon, sort of the beast. We also have sort of more peaceful imagery that comes from the book of Revelation. So towards the end, we have the pearly gates, and we have the streets paved with gold. So a lot of the imagery is, permeated into our culture. And during this talk, I'm going to look at four main views, and I'm going to try to give some good arguments for each of them. And hopefully, if I succeed, you'll kind of be unsure which view that you should hold, because you'll recognise the strength in each of them. Revelation is a difficult book to interpret, and so although this is a talk on Revelation, I'm actually going to refer to other books of the Bible mostly. I think the sort of principle that we should interpret difficult texts in light of clearer passages is a good one to take. And I think that we can therefore make stronger arguments for each of these views by going to some of these passages which are clearer in my mind. So we'll go through the kind of four views now, and if possible, I'd prefer you to wait to ask questions until the end, just so that we can get through the four views to start with. But yeah, if there's anything that's immediately sort of pressing that you think it's valuable if we sort of address at that point, then please just attract my attention. Cool. So yeah, as I say, there'll be plenty of time for discussion at the end, and I'm sure that we'll have different views represented in this room already, so I'm sure that's going to be lively and engaging. Good. So the first view that I would like to look at is called idealism. So the idealist sees the book of Revelation as conveying timeless spiritual truths that will be experienced throughout history. It does not see them as being fulfilled in a single historical event, but sort of multiple events throughout time. This view tends to read Revelation sort of symbolically or allegorically. And I think the different views will come more into focus once we've got some others to compare them to. But for this first view, the main things to take from this are that it's timeless spiritual truths. So it's just as true for the original hearers in John's day as it is for us today. It's just as relevant. And yes, that it's not perhaps referring to a single event, but it can be referring to just as much our lives today as it was referring to the lives of the original hearers. And so I just want to take here 3 verses from Revelation and look at them perhaps as an idealist would look at them. So these verses are from chapter 11, and it says, "Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, 'Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar of those who worship there. But do not measure the court outside the temple, leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. And I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth.'" So as I said, the sort of idealist view will take these as being sort of timeless truths. So they would take these numbers represented here not necessarily as referring to sort of a specific time, so not necessarily referring to that as a literal period, but more sort of symbolically representing some experience. And the way that sort of the idealist would sort of interpret this would be to look back, say, in the Old Testament and see how these numbers are used there, for example. So this period of 42 months, or 3.5 years, represents a period found in the Book of Kings, where Elijah causes a drought to come on the earth. And the sort of context of this is that King Ahab and his wife Jezebel have led Israel astray, that they've been worshipping Baal, and leading the people in that unfaithfulness. And so we have this period of 3.5 years that I guess represents a period of trial, but also represents a period of judgment. So although the passage from Kings doesn't say that it was 3.5 years, here it just says, "After many days the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, 'Go, show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth.'" So although this passage doesn't say that the drought was 3.5 years, this was the sort of tradition that was picked up. So we see these couple of references, first of all from James, where it says, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed fervently that it might not rain. And for 3 years and 6 months it did not rain on the earth. And this passage from Luke, but in truth I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heavens were shut up 3 years and 6 months, and a great famine came over all the land. And Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. So the idealist would take this 3.5 years not as referring to some specific period in the future, but as referencing a period of judgment, a period of trial. Now the other numbers that we had in this passage was 42 and 1,260. So the 42 also the idealist would take to reference the time of the wilderness, so just before the Israelites entered the Promised Land. And that is because there were 42 points where the Israelites stopped during their journey to the Promised Land. So the number 42 here sort of also represents a sort of time of trial, of some perhaps judgment even, but it's also looking forward to entering the Promised Land and entering that rest that God provides. And in terms of the number 1,260, we can find that a similar number, so here 12,600, so 10 times 1,260, exists if you take all the ages of the patriarchs, so from Adam through to Moses, and if you add that up, that also comes to this number. So again, looking at this time of sort of trial perhaps, but looking particularly towards entering the promised land. So the idealist would take these numbers and say what we should interpret this to mean is that it's some period sort of trial, perhaps that tension between the sort of kingdom having come but not fully come, and looking towards entering that promised land, or looking towards entering heaven. So this is how they would take these numbers, not kind of as representing something literal, but representing these timeless truths. And again, the reference here, for example, to the temple, they wouldn't take that necessarily as referring to a literal temple, but as a sort of spiritual reference. And so perhaps referring to Jesus' body, who Jesus claims that he is the temple, that he will raise it again after 3 days. As we have in 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 5 says, as you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious. You yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So perhaps just to sort of recap, this sort of idealist view sees these realities as sort of spiritual, and sees this is referring to our condition now, just as much as it did to the original hearers, that we have this tension between, yes, Jesus has come and died and resurrected and ascended to the right hand of the Father, but we are not yet in the fullness of the kingdom, and so we will expect to experience trial and difficulties before that fullness comes. Yes.
So did rabbis use that as a way to interpret prophecy in, obviously, Old Testament?
So, for example, the number 1,000 or 12,600 appears in the War Scroll, again in sort of apocalyptic literature to sort of think about this final period. So there it's representing 35 years, but it's the same kind of number. So they're using, you can look at kind of other sort of apocalyptic literature from that time where they're using these numbers symbolically in that way. Cool. So that's the idealist view. I'd like to move on to futurism, and then once we've done futurism, we'll have a short break, and then we'll look at the other two views that I want to take a look at. So the futurist view sees the book of Revelation describing physical events on Earth that will predominantly take place in the future. This view tends to read Revelation in a more literal way. So perhaps opposed to the sort of idealist view, this view would see Revelation not as a sort of lens to see our sort of timeless realities, but perhaps more as speaking to a very particular event in history. And in this instance, speaking to a particular event in the future. So it tends to perhaps read the book a little bit more literally in the sense that it sees a sort of physical fulfillment in that, but it will still interpret parts spiritually. So, for example, when you read that Jesus will return with a sword coming out of his mouth, then the sword would perhaps be interpreted symbolically, but it still means that there's a physical fulfillment of that Jesus will return. Good. So I want to look at a passage here from 2 Thessalonians, which I think is really helpful in arguing for the futurist view. So let me read this to you. So this is a letter that Paul has written to the church in Thessalonica, who are concerned that they've missed out on the resurrection, that Jesus has already come, and Paul is reassuring them that's not the case. So here he writes, "Now concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered together to him, we ask you, brothers, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed, either by a spirit or a spoken word, or a letter seeming to be from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. Let no one deceive you in any way. For that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. Do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? And you know what is restraining him now, so that he may be revealed in his time. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains it will do so until he is out of the way. And when the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the breath of his mouth and bring to nothing by the appearance of his coming. The coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan, with all power and false signs and wonders, and with all wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. Therefore, God sends them a strong delusion, so that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness." So the reason why I think this is a good verse to turn to for the futurist view that sees the fulfillment of Revelation in the future in specific physical events is because the futurists will say, well, we know that the coming of the Lord Jesus is in the future. And here in verse 8, we have that this lawless one, this man of lawlessness, is going to be brought to nothing by the appearance of his coming. So we should therefore mean that this man of lawlessness is also in the future. And if this man, this individual, is at some point in the future that's tied to Jesus is coming, then we know that this time of rebellion that we have described here, and him sort of claiming to be God and to setting himself up as an object of worship, this is all taking place in the future as well. And the futurist would probably link this man of lawlessness in with other figures that are found in the Bible, so the Antichrist, the beast, etc. So that would be the argument here. It talks about, I think, the temple. In verse 4, here we see that he says that he will take his seat in the temple of God. And so a futurist who's perhaps reading this a little less symbolically than the idealist, whereas the idealist may interpret these passages as talking about, when they read about the temple, might interpret that as the church or the body of Jesus. The futurist would say that this refers to a physical temple. And so they might link that into a sort of temple being built in Jerusalem again. And the futurist would say, well, you might think that it's odd that Israel still exists in some form, that you look at Israel's neighbours sort of in the Bible, sort of Ammon, Moab, Edom. None of those still exist, whereas Israel does. But the futurist will say, well, it's not surprising that Israel still exists, and that's because God's purposes haven't finished with them. That there's still prophecy to be fulfilled, that Israel needs to be in the land, that the temple needs to be rebuilt. That would link into the future side. And there's also other passages that they would refer to when they look at this. So, for example, this passage from Romans 11 says, "Lest you be wise in your own sight. I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will banish ungodliness from Jacob. And this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins." So again, the futurists would look to passages like this that see a future for Israel where all Israel will be saved. But they would see that not as having been fulfilled yet, and so it must be in the future. I think, it's perhaps helpful to mention one particular...
Just a quick question. Because obviously, related to Israel, would Israel represent the people or the land? Even within the futurist framework? Because technically, obviously, Jacob is Israel, so then it's his descendants.
I mean, I think here you would take Israel to mean the people, sort of the ethnic body that represent Israel.
Because obviously, like I know there's from what you're describing with the rebuilding of the temple, some people see it physically as that land, and obviously we've already mentioned their names, so that was why I was curious.
Yeah, so I think the futurists, I mean, even within these sort of broad sort of strokes of these different views, you'll have lots of different views of exactly what that means. And so, to some extent, I'm painting with broad strokes here. But certainly one view would be that they would see Israel is referring to the people, and a sort of physical temple sort of built there. And I just wanted to mention one particular view, which is known as sort of dispensationalism, that just means that they see different dispensations, so different ages in the Bible. So perhaps just as you might think, there's a time when people are under the law of Moses and that we're under a different age. So they would see these different dispensations or ages. But a very popular view that I guess has made it into our culture is this Left Behind series. So this view here would be that when you have this time of tribulation where this man of lawlessness arises, that prior to that, say the Christians will have already been taken up to heaven and won't go through that. So some futurists would view that as Christians don't go through the tribulation. Other futurists would view that they do. And again, as I've said, that even within these kind of views, there's some differences in opinion. I think perhaps sort of one comment to make on the futurist view is that we should just take these words of Jesus seriously. So here he says, "But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only." So here he's referring to the second coming. And he says, "For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days, before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect." So I think it's important for the futurist to note that Jesus is very clear that we don't know when his second coming is. That we may look at the times of our age and interpret that to mean that maybe this is the end of the world. And maybe it is, but Jesus is clear, we don't know that. And so we should be very careful about saying that this means the world is going to end on whatever date. Lots of people have made predictions, and all those dates that have come have failed to materialise the end of the world. Good. So I think, helpful maybe just to have a 5-minute break, and then we'll dive into the final 2 views and have more of a discussion after that. So the third view that I'd like to look at is preterism. So preter just comes from the Latin word for past. So the preterist interprets the book of Revelation to be speaking predominantly to the day in which it is written. And so this view generally interprets Revelation as being fulfilled in physical events in John's day. So whereas the futurist view saw sort of events being fulfilled sort of physically in the future and still in our future, the preterist view would see, yes, the events were being fulfilled in the future for John, but now relative to us, that's in our past. So it was kind of future at the time of John, but now in our past, unlike the futurist view, which says it's actually still future for us. And unlike the sort of idealist sort of interpretation, it would again, like the futurist view, see sort of physical events being referred to, rather than as sort of timeless truths that are relevant. Good. So there's quite a long passage that I want to look at to argue for this. And I'd actually like to start at the end of the passage just to point towards a verse, verse 34 here, which C.S. Lewis called the most embarrassing verse in the Bible. So let's read it. So verse 34 says, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." And so I think it's helpful when we read this quite long passage, and I think it's helpful to read it all, just so that you have it in context to understand that, the preterist will say that Jesus here says that this will all take place within a generation, and they will say that these events seem very similar to what we read of in the book of Revelation, and therefore, although these are future for the time in which it was written, these are now in our past. Let's kind of read this passage from Matthew 24. So the first few verses kind of give the context. So Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumours of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places, and all these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation, and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. So in these first few verses, Jesus is saying that the temple will be destroyed. So this is probably set around 30 AD, early 30s. And the Jewish temple was destroyed in 70 AD. So the preterist says it will be destroyed within a generation, tick, we're all good. And these other passages we read about the disciples going through a period of tribulation, that some of them will be martyred, that there will be famines and earthquakes and wars. And the preterist says that, well, these must also be past, sort of must be in this time frame, and will read, when they read these things in the book of Revelation, as thinking, well, that's just expanding on this, and that those events are also in the past. Let's read on for the next few verses. So this is Jesus saying, "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place," then it has the cryptic, "Let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, 'Look, he is in the wilderness,' do not go out. If they say, 'Look, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. So again, the preterist will pick out the themes here, that there's a period of great tribulation, that there's a time where sort of false Christs and false prophets will arise and lead people astray. And again, with an eye on that verse at the end of this passage where Jesus says, all these things will happen within a generation. When they see these things happening in the book of Revelation, they think, right, well, this must still be in the past. This was fulfilled before the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 AD. And then this passage goes on. So immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So again, I guess we have some very sort of spiritual language here, the sun being darkened, the moon not giving its light. The preterists would perhaps interpret this more sort of symbolically. There's a substantial change going on. And then there's these odd verses here where it says, then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. So again, the preterists will argue that all of these events are past, because Jesus says this will all take place within a generation. And this seems to lead to some tension, because a lot of people would read about the coming of the Son of Man and think that that's not past, and that's why C.S. Lewis says this is the most embarrassing verse in the Bible. So it's maybe just helpful to explain why the preterist thinks that this coming is in the past. And they would think that because they think in this passage it's referring to these verses from Daniel. So here it says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So when the sort of preterists reads these sort of phrases, it talks about the Son of Man, it talks about the clouds of heaven, it talks about coming. They read it within this context of Daniel 7, but they read it as, and he came to the Ancient of Days. So they would read this not as a coming of Jesus to earth, but a coming of Jesus to heaven. This would be his sort of exaltation, his enthronement. And so they would see this, Jesus' kingdom is being established, and that this, therefore, is a past event that has taken place, and that once his kingdom has been established, that he sends out his angels to gather the elect. And they would say that's exactly what we see in the book of Acts, that the message goes out to, from Jerusalem to Samaria to the ends of the earth. And so all of these are past. So the preterist just says that a lot of these themes here we see in this passage from Matthew are the themes that we see in Revelation. That we should interpret this passage in Matthew as being past, so we should interpret those in Revelation as being past. Cool. This is just a picture of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Good. So we finally made it to the fourth view, and this is historicism. So the historicist interprets the book of Revelation as detailing physical events throughout the rest of history. So this view takes the Revelation as kind of a compendium of history. So you start with the book of Revelation, and it sort of starts in John's day. That sort of gives us sort of one sort of time point that we have fixed. And we look at the end of the book of Revelation, and we see it talking about the new heavens and the new earth. And so the historicist says, well, that gives us another fixed point in history. And then they would say that, well, the rest of Revelation must just fill in the gap. And that the events described there are, again, like the futurist and the preterist views, sort of physical events, but rather than all those events coming at one period in time, so all coming, say, in the past, sort of within that first generation, or all coming at some future point, the historicist will say that they are sort of spread out throughout history. So there's different sort of periods in history that sort of proponents of this view have seen as sort of fulfillment. So they've seen sort of the fall of the Roman Empire, perhaps as some fulfillments. They've seen the Reformation in certain points, and during the Reformation, certainly a very popular view was to read, say, about the Pope being the beast, and this historicist view was very popular then. Here is some imagery that interprets the beast as referring to Napoleon Bonaparte. So this is from the sort of early 1800s, sort of during the Napoleonic Wars. And here you see Napoleon and his allies sort of represented by the beast, and the Spaniards sort of defending and taking the beast out. This type of view, although very popular, sort of say during the time of the Reformation, has particularly waned in sort of supporters recently. It's quite hard to find people that would still hold to this view, and part of the reason for that is that lots of different historicists wouldn't necessarily agree on what was the particular fulfillment. So here we have a fulfillment of the beast being Napoleon. I've already mentioned that some people saw the beast as being fulfilled by the Pope. And so it's hard to say that, I mean, with all of the views, there's no kind of clear one view, but even with the sort of historicist view, it's hard to say this is exactly the event that it is referring to. However, I do want to make a bit of an argument for seeing Revelation as being having fulfillment historically, and I think that can be done by thinking about how the New Testament writers see sort of prophecy and see the story of God being fulfilled. So here I've got this quote from John Barclay, who's a famous Pauline scholar. And I think, what he writes here about Paul's writings is just as true for the other writings in the New Testament. So, the Gospels, but also for John's Revelation. So here, John Barclay writes that regarding Paul, that Paul's figural readings find reverberations in history of the Christ event, which reveals what that history and not just those texts were really about. Christ is the hermeneutical key to both scripture and history, because all of reality takes its bearings from the unique and particular event of his death and resurrection. It is the good news of an event that Paul hears resonating backwards and forwards in history and backwards and forwards in the text. So what John Barclay is saying here is that the Christ event is the defining moment of history. And what you'd therefore find is that the rest of history, so sort of the Old Testament as well as kind of our present history and the future, you will see sort of history kind of echoing that defining moment as sort of the Christ event sort of resounds, that you then hear these echoes at different periods of history. And so, sort of for the historicist, it's perhaps not surprising that they see fulfillments of the events in Revelation throughout history, because, people like John Barclay here would just say, well, they're hearing echoes of the bigger event, the Christ event, and what that means. And so I just want to give sort of one example of that kind of reading, sort of by looking at, say, the Old Testament and a fulfillment of the sort of famous passage where it says that the virgin shall conceive and bear a son and be called Emmanuel. So here in this passage, let's read it. So in Isaiah 7, starting at verse 10, it says, "Again the Lord spoke to Ahaz, ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be deep as Sheol or high as heaven." But Ahaz said, "I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test." And he said, "Hear then, O house of David. Is it too little for you to weary men, that you weary my God also? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted." And then later in Isaiah we have, "And I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said to me, call his name Mahashalal-Hashbaz. For before the boy knows how to cry, my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria." So with this kind of view, it seems that these passages, or this prophecy about the virgin conceiving and bearing a son and being called Emmanuel, is fulfilled in Isaiah's day. But what people like John Barclay would say is that the real fulfillment is in Jesus. That is the central event. And what you're seeing here isn't sort of the secondary fulfillment. Sorry, what you're seeing in sort of Jesus isn't a sort of secondary fulfillment. That's the primary event. What you're seeing sort of throughout history is kind of the echo, the sort of secondary sort of fulfillment as sort of history sort of resounds to that song that is the defining sort of song of history, that Christ has come and has been born of a virgin. And so the historicist will say that similarly, just as you have these secondary fulfillments throughout sort of past history, you will also have these fulfillments throughout future history. And so these verses in Revelation will have historical fulfillments in the future. Cool. So I guess having gone over the four views, I want to kind of just wrap up and sort of, give a bit of a view of thinking, sort of how do these views sort of relate to each other? And I think it's helpful to sort of place these on sort of two axes. So this y-axis is sort of has a past focus and a sort of future focus, and this x-axis is thinking of the text as a lens, so thinking sort of analogically, discerning similarities, so perhaps thinking more symbolically, and the text is a sort of code, sort of decoding symbols to discover precise correspondence. So sort of the preterist and the futurist views would lie more on the sort of left-hand side of this figure, for example. So they would sort of read Revelation as sort of almost a code, sort of referring to sort of physical events that are going to take place. Obviously, the preterist view would interpret that with a past focus, and the futurist view would interpret that with a future focus. The idealist view would lie more on the sort of right-hand side, sort of interpreting Revelation as a lens. So rather than it having a sort of specific event that we need to sort of decode to understand what it means, as a lens it will just sort of, is about, these are sort of timeless truths. So it's about, the importance of being faithful during times of persecution, rather than sort of a particular period period in history where we need to be faithful because persecution's coming. And the historicist view sort of will have more of the sort of present focus. So it's not looking necessarily towards the past or the future. It would perhaps, I guess, lie a bit more on the sort of text as code, as sort of seeing sort of the fulfillment of historical events, but yeah, probably lies more to the right, say, than where the sort of preterist or futurist views lie. So I hope that gives a bit of an introduction to some of these views. I'm sure you've got lots of questions, and we can dive in sort of in the discussion part, which comes next.